In this video, I will be explaining and demonstrating the basic concept of watercolor. As an overview, I will show a few simple swatches before moving on to demonstrate a painting of a lake at sunset. First, supplies. For paper, I will be using a 6-inch by 9-inch sheet of watercolor paper. The paper is cold pressed and 140 pounds, which will allow it to take on a decent amount of water before buckling. For brushes, I will be using a flat brush for washes and a round brush for general brushwork. For watercolor paint, I will be using Holbein Artists watercolors. This is a 12-color set, but for the purposes of this video, I will only be using permanent yellow, vermilion hue, and Prussian blue. As a palette, I will be using Reeves' large rectangular palette. This palette has many wells and mixing areas, perfect for watercolor. I will also be using a paper towel for drying the brush, a cup half full of water, and artist's masking tape. This is my setup for painting with watercolor. My palette and my cup of water are on the right, and my brushes are in between my palette and my paper. Before we start, we'll need to do two things. First, squeeze fresh paint into the wells. Make sure to squeeze only a little bit of paint, because in watercolor, a little goes a long way. Next, using the artist's masking tape, divide your paper into 7 sections, 6 small ones for swatches, and 1 larger one for a demonstration painting, like so. We'll be starting with 2 one-color flat washes. Our goal for the first swatch is to achieve an evenly distributed opaque wash. First, wet your brush thoroughly. Tap it on the edges of the cup to remove excess water. Pick up a little color on the end of your brush and mix it on the palette. Make sure the color is fully concentrated. Apply the color to the swatch, starting from the top and moving down to the bottom. Reload your brush constantly to make sure that you are always applying paint. Once you're done with the swatch, you can brush back over it to ensure that the swatch is even. For our next swatch, pick up a little color, or in my case, I'm using my old color, and dilute it with an almost full brush of water. Apply the color the same way we did the first swatch. Notice that the water has diluted the color and the color is now transparent. Continue until you have finished the swatch, and you can go back over it again to make sure that the color is even. Both of these washes are wet on dry techniques, where wet paint is applied on a dry surface. Our next 2 swatches are one-color gradations. These can be done in a number of ways, but I'll be demonstrating a wet on wet technique, where wet paint is applied on a wet surface, and a wet on dry technique. For our third swatch, we'll be doing a wet on wet technique. Start with a clear wash of water. Apply clean water over the swatch, enough so that the entire area is visibly wet, but not so that it puddles. Mix a very diluted color on your palette and apply it slightly away from the side you're starting from, in this case, the top. Mix in a little more color and apply it below the diluted color. Continue until you have finished the swatch. Notice that the color runs to where the water is, and that the water helps the colors mix. Moving on to the fourth swatch. Mix a strong concentration of color and apply it to the top. Then, diluting the color on the palette, touch the edge of the opaque color and pull it so that it bleeds into the diluted color. Repeat until finished. If you'd like, you can go over it again to make sure it's smooth. The most important thing to remember about doing one-color gradations is to control the concentration of the mix, thus, how much color and how much water is in the mix. Our final 2 swatches will be 2-color gradations. Both of these techniques will be wet on wet, but remember that there are countless ways to create any of the swatches we are making today. Our 5th swatch will be in a gradual mixing technique. Start with a clear wash. Remember to apply enough water for it to be visibly wet, but not so much that it puddles. Starting with the lighter of the 2 colors, mix a nicely concentrated mix of color and apply it to the top of the swatch. Continue down. As you reach the middle, pick up a little bit of the second color, in this case, red, and mix it with the first color. Apply this new color underneath the first color in the swatch. Continue through the swatch, mixing a little bit more red as you continue down. By the time you reach the bottom of the swatch, you should be fully on the second color. If not, try adding a little more of the second color each time. In our sixth and last swatch, we will be keeping the two colors separate. Start with a clear wash. Apply a strong concentration of the first color, yellow. Dilute it slightly and keep applying it until you reach the bottom. This should be very much like our one color gradation swatch. Next, do the same thing with your second color, but start from the bottom and move up. In the middle, you should have an equal concentration of each color. We will now be doing a demonstration video of a sunset on a lake. Using a pencil, lightly sketch a horizon line and a low circle for a sun. Draw a few distant mountains on top. Below the horizon line, approximate where the reflections of the mountains and the sun are going to be. Make sure you draw as lightly as possible so that the pencil lines don't show up on the final painting. Also be sure not to erase too hard and wear down the paper. We'll start with the sky with the two-color gradation with a flat brush. Apply clear wash over the sky and the mountains, but do not put water on the sun. Start with the yellow and apply it around the sun. As you continue around the sun, mix in a little bit of red so that the yellow becomes orange. Apply this around the yellow. Continue until you get to red. At the end, darken the red with a little bit of Prussian blue and finish off the area. Let this area dry. Once it is completely dry, start painting the water. Apply clear wash over the entire water area. Estimate where the reflection of the sun will be and apply yellow around that area. To texturize the lake, use the edge of the flat brush to create horizontal lines bleeding into and out of the sun. Using the same stroke, add a little bit of red and continue to reflect the sky. Add Prussian blue and finish the edges of the area. While the paint is still wet, add darker Prussian blue underneath the mountains as the mountains' reflections and shadows. Once the water is dry, pick up a semi-diluted mix of Prussian blue with a round brush and apply it to the mountains. This is like our wet on dry translucent wash, our second swatch. Do not overbrush the area or you will pick up color from the background. This technique of applying translucent layers is called glazing. After completing the mountains, pick up a dark mix of Prussian blue with a small round brush. Flick the brush up from the bottom of the paper to create silhouettes of grass. You can also create reeds by painting in small ovals near the tip. Use the tip of the brush to achieve thinner lines and precise application of paint. Remember to vary the size, shape, and thickness of each blade of grass. Another interesting technique is called lifting. Using a slightly wet round brush, pick up a little color from the background in a line. You can also create puffy shapes to imitate clouds. Use a napkin to dry the area. Once the area is dry, you can use a little bit of blue on the edges of the cloud to make it pop out. Once the mountains are dry, we can go over them with yet another layer. Pick up a slightly darker mix of Prussian blue. Choose one mountain and paint that over. Remember to not brush it over or you will pick up color from the previous layer. This is another addition to glazing. The painting is now finished. Now we move on to the final part of painting, taking off the masking tape. When you remove the masking tape, be sure to remove it diagonally and flat against the paper instead of pulling up to avoid pulling some of the paper along with it. Once you're finished, you're done. These are the very basics of watercolor, but there are endless textures that watercolor is capable of. Besides using brushes, you can also achieve unique textures with rubbing alcohol, masking fluid, plastic wrap, toothbrushes, straws, salts, rubber cement, and napkins. I hope you enjoyed trying out watercolor and are interested in going on. Good luck painting!